Let's not forget, this is a command economy. If they want to really pull back, they can do it. Yeah. But again, it's a two-edged sword, because if they pull back too hard, they have to keep growing at a certain pace, 7 to 8%, to avoid civil insurrection. Yeah. So it's a very difficult balance, the Chinese authorities.
Let's take a look at implications then for South Africa, because as we were looking at earlier, it's the resources 20 sector that's really propping the market up today. The commodity story in South Africa, to a large extent, very reliant on that Chinese economic growth story. Implications for South Africa in that regard? Indeed.
And we're looking at, I think, more of the base metals here. I'm not so wild about the story for gold. I mean, that's very much a separate issue. Yeah. And a platinum, of course, has got all sorts of other factors affecting that as well. But I think if we look at the more basic commodities, iron ore, coal, copper, nickel, this type of thing, looking very, very good indeed. And provided that Chinese economy can keep going, and provided it doesn't get into too much of an inflationary type of scenario, then I think the outlook for our commodities is very, very good indeed. We're probably going to see as good a year in commodities as we've seen in many, many years.
That a positive on the one hand, but one of the pressure points has been the strengthening local unit that we've seen. We've seen the rand entering the year now on a firmer note. I mean, how much pressure do you see being exerted by the local unit as we move forward for our exporters and our miners?
Do you know, there's a lot of debate in the media about what a terrible thing it is and that the rand is so strong. And yes, the rand is strong. Intuitively, when you travel overseas, you see the rand is very, very strong indeed. On a purchasing power parity basis, if you go back far enough, it's probably a little bit undervalued. If you look at things like the Big Mac Index, it's probably undervalued, but that's got lots of inadequacies built in as well. I think we have to bear in mind that the global economy is still pretty dead. Yeah. It's coming back grudgingly and slowly. And as far as our exports are concerned, things like motor vehicles, for example, and that's one of our biggest exports, yes, the rand, in normal circumstances, a strong rand would hinder that. But even a rand at what, 8, 10, 12 to the dollar, I don't think would make an awful lot of difference in terms of what would actually happen to those exports, because the demand side is so weak. So I think we have to bear this in mind. In a weak global economy, it doesn't really make an awful lot of difference what you do to your currency.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at the dollar, because of course that rand-dollar relationship has been very key of late. I mean, we're starting to hear rumors that the Fed might raise interest rates sooner than expected, which would likely strengthen the dollar. Your view on the dollar moving forward, and whether any strength in that regard would be sustainable?
I think we'll see the dollar strengthening from about mid-year onwards. I think there's a few months left, probably 5-6 months, before we get real conviction that the US economy is moving ahead sustainably at this kind of pace. Because we're getting all sorts of conflicting views at this point in time about how strong that US economic recovery is. Still the biggest economy on earth, and it's very, very important for all of us that it does get back to a sustained growth path. But obviously, once it does, then the authorities, the Fed, will feel obliged to start hiking rates to try and cool down that economy. But I think we're a long way off that yet. We're at least 6 months away from that yet.
Of course, attention this week is largely focused on US non-farm payrolls data on Friday. What are your expectations there?
Yeah, look, it's critically important, because we're sitting at 10% unemployment rate at this point in time. The inventory cycle looks like it's turned, and it looks like US firms are starting to re-employ people. And again, it's vitally important that we start seeing some people being pulled back into the workforce, because without that, it comes back to your earlier question, you can't have a sustainable recovery in the US as far as I'm concerned. So I think it's very important that we actually see a turnaround in that figure.